Hello and welcome back to another episode of our Mega-lo-Mania remake in Unreal Engine 4. So continuing off where we were on Wednesday, the previous stream, we were working on the menus. Which menu was it? Yes, we were working on the menus, and what I was trying to achieve was to dynamically add the research to the menus, rather than having predefined images. And there were some complications with that made it a little bit more awkward than I expected, but I have identified a solution and have applied it. So as we can see here, this is our blueprint menu, and that therefore is the wrong one. We want the research menu. So yeah, as we can see here, this is the research menu, and it has currently displaying 3 of the technologies. I think that's one as well. That must, maybe the brick is in the background. The rock is in the background actually. So we actually only have, don't know why those images are set. That doesn't matter. Nonetheless, point is, we have our containers, and there shouldn't be any visible text. They must be coming from the graph, so that's okay. But the key thing was that within the graph, we weren't able to add an image that we would from the palette. We weren't able to just drag one of these in and use it within the graphing code. And we couldn't create a widget of that type. So the solution was to create a custom widget that we've actually just called the image widget, or sprite image, sorry. So the sprite image is literally just our sprite image root and an image that we've called default image. And the graph for this simply has one function defined, which is our set sprite. And the key thing here is that we take in a sprite property by reference, and we call this make brush from sprite function, which takes the sprite and a width and a height that we've defined in the inputs of the function and defaulted to 64. That doesn't make a great deal of difference with the way that we use it, but there's just some default values. And then once we've got that brush, we can then set it on the actual image. So target is image, we're passing in the default image. And that's what we need to use to get a sprite to show up in an image widget, I guess they call it, but whatever you would refer to these palette things as, but a raw image as such. And now with our sprite image widget that we have created, we now can use that within our graph of our research menu. So this code is fairly similar to what it was, well, it pretty much is what it was before. We get the data table row names from the technologies, we iterate over them, and then we get the data table row, and for each row we create our sprite image. So we can see that's our sprite image class that we just seen, and the return value of that we then call set sprite on it, and we pass in the sprite from the data table row from over here. We define more correct for our use case maximum or width and height, and then we add that child to the vertical box. In this case, we're adding it to and we add it to a vertical box, and we determine which vertical box it is by taking the category from the row and using the select node. We pass in the 3 different vertical boxes as the 3 options. The enumeration obviously refers to each one of those values, and the return value therefore is the correct vertical box for that technology. So we can jump back over to the actual game itself and press play, and we can see that we've got our root menu that we've pre-created. We can go into the research, and we can see now we have the first 3 technologies available. So we can prove that this all works by going to our data table for our technologies which is that one. And we can add another technology, and we'll just add shield 2 because that's a fairly easy one to add. Shield 2. Select the appropriate sprite. There we go. Make sure the category is selected correctly. In this case it's repair, and the epoch should be 1, although that's not yet used. So that therefore should be 2 in this case. We obviously don't use that, and we can actually see in here that they're not actually, it's not showing up, even though it is in the pre-construct. I would expect it to show up. I'm not quite sure why in some cases it doesn't, but when we press play, hopefully it is there. So while it hasn't shown up in the editor, it at least shows up correctly within this context, and that's what's important anyway. So we can see that that works. Obviously we could add all of the technologies, but we'll do that some other time. So what I'm actually going to work on today is try and get it so that we can select one of these technologies and it show the appropriate research, not so much progress, but the icons required to be able to complete a research, I suppose. So we're actually looking for this. This is how it should look. We need the minus sprite that we'll find in a minute. And when we select a item, it puts the research we're trying to go for, a multiply, the little man stays where he is, and equals, and the clock. And we'll try and put the numbers, well, we'll probably be able to put the infinity value underneath the clock, but we may not be able to do the actual number of people yet. But that's what we're going to go for. And we'll see how far we can get with that. So first we need the sprites we don't have. I don't know if we've got the multiply, but we definitely have the equals. So we can go into our sprites, see what we've got here. So we have the equals, we have the multiply. I think then we're just missing the minus. So we can jump straight to our sprite sheet, try and find the minus, which is going to be a bit of a challenge because it's going to be quite a small little sprite. That's probably why I haven't got it before. So we've got the multiply there and the equals there, and I think that actually there under the OK is the minus we want. So we'll select that. So we'll try and get the source position correct in this case. 1, 4, 4 and 5. And we'll actually name this one as well, I think, if we can. Or is it that one there? Yes, and we'll call this minus. So we'll call it MLM icon minus. I mean, it's a bit small to see in this case, but I've just given it a name and hoped for the best. Yep, that looks fine. And we'll also name correctly the multiply. So we'll just bring that down by 1, or to the right by 1 as well, and 97, and then a bit smaller in both directions, and we'll call that one the multiply. So again, we'll do MLM icon. Oh, I think I just finished that research. And I didn't quite finish that. Icon multiply. And again, just so we can position it correctly, we'll get the equals as well, because that's significantly bigger than the equals really needs to be. So it's probably about 129, 128, 98, 10, no, 7, and 6, 5. And in this one, we've actually already called it MLM icon equal. Oh, some of them are icons, some of them are icon. Yeah, so it looks like the default name is actually icon, whereas the equals is multiple icons. so we'll just change that one. Again, very difficult to see in the way that this view is. You can change the view here, so we can make the thumbnails bigger, all the way to maximum size, and we can also show it as a list, and then also make them bigger, or we can show it as columns, but they don't show the actual thumbnails in the column view, so that's not so helpful. The list works quite well, definitely, if you're kind of going to be renaming many of them at once. So we also need the infinity. So there's actually two infinity sprites. There's a grey one and a white one. The grey means it's going to take forever and nothing's happening, whereas the white one means you're going to do this forever. So when it comes to factory production, we use the white one to say we want to create as many of these things as we can. And this one obviously used for research or factory production, which doesn't actually have any people assigned to it, and therefore will never finish. So, excuse me, the first one we want in this case is the never gonna finish version. So some of these, like as we saw there, like the sword even has a green MLM Army Green name, and that's because I happen to have selected the Green Army icon at the point that I was chopping these out, and the way that Unreal names them is says, well, if you've got this one selected, assume that the next one you've just created is related. It's not always the case. So we'll call that infinity blocked. Emphasize that it won't be done. We will change the name of these as well, so that's icon repair category. Perhaps we don't need the prefix, but again, we'll stick with it because we've started now. Okay, so now we've got the additional sprites that we need. We can add them directly to our research. So if we look at our game, let's put some people on this one, and move that over. Oops, too much. So our equals is there. So our equals is actually in the wrong place. So I thought when I originally dropped these things in that the equals actually came further down near the numbers. Didn't remember it correctly, but that's fine. So we can take our little equals and delete that because we know we don't need it. But we do need two text boxes effectively in there. Big font. So the first text box will just read as 00. And font option over here, just really need to shrink that down to probably about 8. No, even less than 8. Don't really know what size is. It's not obviously the don't know why it's leaked out either. When it goes to size 2, when it was a higher size it seems to fit fine, but when you go to 2 it falls out. Oh well. Yeah, it doesn't like low numbers. We don't really want 3 either, but it just does not like that kind of size. We'll come back to that. We obviously need to space them out and position them so they're correct with the little man, but we'll deal with that again a bit later. So we need some additional spike boxes. So in this case, we have our research of choice, a multiply, our little tech man equals, and a clock. So we could, because we need the first icon, the actual tech we're researching, to change when the user selects it, we could use our sprite image, because the sprite image has our function to change its sprite, which is what we're going to have to do when we start research. So let's find out where box we're in. So the tech man currently is sitting in a vertical box container, and we need to give it a horizontal box so we can put things next to that. So put the horizontal box in and move the tech man in. We're going to need some spacers to space all these things out, so we'll just drop a few of them in. Don't know how many we'll need. Don't know where the other one went actually. Yeah, there we go, back to where we were. So we'll just drop them on that horizontal bar. I think we're going to need quite a few. So the tech man is kind of in the middle. We then need 2 images. In this case, because of the multiply and equals, we know that they're always going to be there, so we'll just drop standard images in there. Specify image size, tint, where's this? Pick the appropriate image. So in this case it's the multiply, and in this case it's the equals. Missing where the size to content is, but nonetheless. So I think because of the clock and the research, we'll need 2 more spacers in here. And for the research, we'll use the one that we have pre-created, our own sprite image box. And then for the clock, we can just use a normal sprite box. And this one needs to be the timer. I don't know if... I don't think I named that, so just for convenience we'll jump back over here. Yeah, because it's the icon's icon. Call it the timer. Okay, so can't set the sprite to a flipbook. That's not so great. Flipbook would make the potentially make the countdown easy to do, but if we can't do it, then we can't do it. So we'll jump into our sprites and find our clock sprite for completely full. So I think that's how it defaults. We don't have completely full. Let's just finish that one off. We also don't have completely empty in our set. Maybe they're at the top. Ah, there we go. Yeah, so we need icons 20. So we use a completely full one. Some sounds. So obviously the sizing has gone a bit weird there. Probably need a placeholder or something to apply to this one. So we need the horizontal box, which takes up the full set, full size even. Don't really want it to fit, be full. Can't remember where the size to content option is. Canvas panel slot has it for the background. The vertical box, yeah, the vertical box has it. Yeah, so it's canvas panel seems to have it, but not the actual images themselves. Okay, but that's okay. So we know that our multiply is only 7 by 7, so how do we get it to be just 7 by 7? Must be something to do with the containers make everything big. Widget sizing seems to be somewhat of a pain. It's not looking so great. And yet when we had it before, the man was the right size. But since we've dropped in some of these images, we can't control their size, and they are too big. Maybe if we have yeah, so there we go. Putting the image in a canvas panel seems to have given us the ability to size it correctly. Seems a bit awkward, but it does work. So the image now has size to content. Maybe actually what we want then is, because it doesn't have it when the horizontal box slots here, but if we select fill, now go to it, nope. Yeah, I don't know why we don't get that control, but we're able to specify the position and the width of our equals on our multiply. We will need to change the visibility of the equals and multiply, so they are going to have to be variables. This one will be our multiply icon. Call it that. And this one will be our equals icon. I guess just because it worked, we'll just put these in a canvas panel as well. So we know we only want it at 16 by 16. Maybe the size of this is affected by this, so we'll jump over here and make that 16 by 16. The sprite image itself doesn't have any specific sizing criteria, and the default image, we've defaulted that down to 16 by 16, see if that makes any difference. Compile and save that, and over here, yes, that's made it better. Okay, so the primary sprites are in place. Don't don't think it's necessarily even. Center everything. Fill it. That fills it completely the wrong way. Kind of getting there. Little loop. Not necessarily pleased with the amount of hierarchy we have to have there, but at least everything is in the right place and centered. So we can center these two items. We'll obviously need a spacer at the beginning and between them and at the end. So now if we take the horizontal box, fill it, still fills it vertically for some unknown reason. So we want that to have slightly less influence than the other fills. And this one, yeah. Yep, that doesn't work. It's kind of guesswork to get all the pieces in the right place. That's close enough. So we've got the tech image, we'll call that tech image. We've got the multiply icon, the tech man itself, equals icon, and the timer. That one's an icon, that's an icon, that's an icon, and that's an image. Okay, so give them more consistent names. That would update them within the graph anyway, so that's okay. Okay, so now we've got all the bits in place. When we add a new tech to it, we want to be able to select that tech. So we've created the widget here. Do we have a click event? Oh, that's the spike image. So we have the mouse button down event here. Enter, leave. But yeah, so no actual click by default by the look of it. But that's okay. So we can add here the binding for the click, and we can't add it here because it's dynamically created for the individual researchers. So we will have to add it here. So we can create a binding. So to actually get this to work, we'll have to handle the on click or on button down binding within here. But when that happens, we need to trigger another event. Create event. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll need a dispatcher. And we'll just call it. This one is not necessary. So fairly straightforward. When we click on this image, we call this event, and then we return from the function. So now within the research menu, we can get that. We can bind to the on-click event. Move these over a bit more. Yeah, so this return value, this widget, is actually going into these three things. So if we take a pin from it, we can make that clearer. By doing it like that, I think. Makes it a little bit more organized. Maybe this one can go up instead of down. Looks a bit awkward now, doesn't it? Just trying to make sure that it's clear that this same sprite is being used by these three nodes, but that should do alright. So we bind to that event, and then we use the add custom event, I think it was. Not that one, no. Create event to call the function that we haven't defined yet. So the function has to have some arguments, because we don't know what we click on, I don't think. Let's see. If we create a new function on tech image click, icon click, no inputs. So yeah, we can do that, but we wouldn't know what we've just clicked on if we did it like that. So we definitely need to know what we've clicked on. So we're going to have an input, and the input's going to well, what can the input be? The sprite itself isn't going to tell us as it is what it is, because all the sprite knows is which image it's being shown. We need the sprite image widget to really own that technology that we've given it. Because at the moment over here, all we're doing is saying show this image. But the image isn't going to be any good to us. What we want is this whole object. But obviously the problem with that is this sprite image that we've got is good enough to be used with anything. We could use it with text, as we are doing. We could use it with resources later on. We want it to be dynamic enough so that it's not a specific thing, at least not in its current form. But we definitely need to tell that sprite what it is. Now, we could use the row name and have an enum type or something, so that the sprite has not only a type, say a resource or a technology, but it also has the name of that thing. That's viable. Or it could hold the technology as a whole. If it's a name, then we're going to only need to get the technology again elsewhere, but we also keep it a little bit more generic. Let's have it as, because it's easier to store two variables, the name and the type, rather than we'd have to specialize the sprite image to be a technology sprite image, and we would have to specialize again to be a resource sprite image, and potentially so on and so forth. We'll stick with passing in the two pieces of information. So rather than having a set or using the set sprite function, we'll have don't really know what to call it. It would be generic, call it set data. And in that, we'll take the name. First, we'll take the type, which is going to be an enumeration at some point, which we need to define, and a name, which will just be a name. Neither of them need to be passed by reference, I don't think. So then we need to create that enum. So it's going to be a technology, it's going to be a resource. I don't know at this point if it could be anything else. So I'll just give it a nice generic name. Oops. And now we can use that in our new function. Can we? Maybe give it some values first. Research menu. Sprite image. So our set data function will take one of those enums, our meta type enum. Again, it doesn't matter what the default value is, and with that it will use the select. It's here. There we go. So we use a switch on the meta type to give us our two pins for the different types, and we basically need to take that. I think actually we can take it completely. I'll put it over here. So if it's a technology, so I think actually what we can do is use a switch, not a switch, select. Select we want. Yeah, because while we can do it that way, we know that we're really only going to differentiate with the table that we're using. Is that true? Yeah, because that's not true, is it? Because we need to break it to get the sprite. We need to know what it is, so we have to do it this way and have two branches effectively. That's fine. So we haven't done any of the resources yet, so we can ignore that side entirely. If it's found, then we can set the sprite, not to the category, to the sprite, and that should be that. I'll give it the right size as well. I think actually all of our sprites are going to be 16 by 16, so we should probably just change the default value to our set sprite inputs and default to be 16 by 16 instead. So we'd be forever changing them otherwise. Okay, so that should allow our sprite image now to be any of the technologies and know what technology it is, almost. We need to keep the name, so we'll right click, promote to variable, shuffle things around a bit more. There we go. And that variable will be the type name and not a local variable. Undo that. Promote to a variable. So we need to store both the name and the type so we can reuse them later on. So the type goes into there, and there, and there. So we store the information, and then we use it to pick whether we're displaying a technology or potentially later on a resource or other things depending on what we need. Within the menu, we now need to move that closer. So we create the sprite image as we did before even. Don't know why that's yeah, okay, sorry, that makes sense. That was from the previous one, wasn't it? So we bind to the event of the new widget like we did before. That's fine, but we don't want to call set sprite, we want to call set data. And the target for that will be our new widget. And the type, in this case, because we're coming from the research menu, will be technology, and the name will be our array element from over there. So hopefully, okay, so our create event, we know that our bind to on click back in our sprite, our on click has an input, should have an input. And we want two inputs, one as the meta type and one as the name. And they are going to be the type and the type name, like that. Why not? Let's just recreate that. So we'll call it technology, well actually that one and that one. Is that better? Yeah. It must have been because it looked like the new one, but it was still the old one underneath. So just re-adding it makes sense. We need to define the function here to the on tech icon clicked to have our two properties. Again, it's the type, which is our meta type enum, and our name, which is name. compile that back over here, select the right function, compile it again, and that's all put in place, and we'll just make sure everything's working okay by printing out the name. Let's see if that works. Okay, so that works, except that everything seems to have put itself as a repair because we forgot to, within the research menu, event graph, forgot to specify the type when we're setting the data. It's always technology. Yeah, actually that's fine. The set data doesn't... Oh no, it's not the set data here, it's the index here. Can we get... So the type is actually only known within this context, although it's different. It's the wrong type, isn't it? Where are we? Because we set the sprite within the set to data call now, everything outside doesn't know what that sprite is. So our set data function can't return the technology because that would make it specific to technology. It can't return the category of the technology because of the same problem. So perhaps it would have been better, or will be better, to use a specialization here so that we can return what we want to return. In the meantime, we can take this code and we can use it to set the right type. So we'll pull that over, move all them over. So we'll get the data table row again. Once we've got that row, we'll break it so we know what the category is, and then we'll put the category into the right place. It's a bit long-winded, and it's not necessarily ideal getting the data table row twice in two different contexts, so there's definitely some room for improvement there, but just try and make it work. So we should have them all back in the right place, and we should know what we're clicking on again. So now when we click on something, we want to update this information here. You can see that the font is actually quite small, so maybe we can make the font a bit bigger as well. Back into the research menu, designer, just make that 4 instead. Okay, so now we know when we click on something within this context, because we get the on clicked event. In the research menu, we are binding to that event, and we are calling our on technology clicked function, or on tech icon clicked. Now we need to do something with that item. Now we know what type it is, but we know what type it is by dint of where we are here. The only thing that we're going to be clicked on within this context is tech, so we don't care about that. What we do care about is the name and what technology it is. So we'll take these again. And we'll do that to get the data table for that technology. And now we want to, in the designer, tech icon, we want to get to the tech icon, and we want to set data. Now again, we're setting an icon. We know that it's technology, so that's fine. We also know what the name is, so we don't actually have to do that. We do this because we're going to need it later. So we could do that after, we could do it before, but inevitably if we do it after, we can make sure we can verify it by dint of this call. If this doesn't get a name, row not found is called and not row found, and therefore set data is not called and we don't do something we don't need to do. But what this should do is set the appropriate icon when we click here. There we go. So that was fairly straightforward because we'd set up all the image to be able to just change dynamically with the name, and when we make a click we know what name it is, so it all ties in very well. Now we could keep doing that. We could have tied it in directly, perhaps, so that the rather than the research menu doing kind of this relationship between the tech icon and what we've clicked, we could probably have the tech icon bind that in somehow with some bindings. We also know that it's a sprite image, so we could have an event here that we would connect up, but because the menu needs to know it for other purposes like setting the time, how long it's going to take, or know how long it's going to take and divide that by how many people you've got assigned to it, all that kind of stuff, we don't actually need to we actually want to handle it within the research menu, I mean. So this one is actually a little bit awkward because this shouldn't say 0 unless I don't think actually it should say 0 at all. I think maybe even when it goes from almost finished to 0, it's I don't really remember if it goes 0. I think it might actually, because that basically represents how many times it has to go round the clock. So 0 times would mean that it's counting down to the final few seconds. So it would actually say 0, but it also would say infinite. It's a giant image. So this will be our infinity icon. I think I perhaps should call them image, really, because that's what they are, but nonetheless, we need to put that under our text here. And again, we're going to need a canvas panel. So we can size the content, pick the appropriate icon. There we go. So the positioning is going to be a bit more awkward because it's different size to the text there, but obviously we're only ever going to show one of these two things. It's either going to be the text or it's going to be the infinity. We still will have to adjust how much space perhaps this spacing is, or perhaps add additional spaces to get that to work moving forwards. But for now we'll just leave it wherever. Worry more about getting the functionality right than the positioning of these things at the bottom. So maybe a better way to do that. So we know the infinity would only ever show when there's 0. So okay, so where are we now? We can select the appropriate item. We actually probably want to change that background because we don't really want it bright white. See if that makes any difference. That might actually just make it a border and not actually show anything at all. Okay, that's better. So we got rid of the white background, and it still shows the image. So we don't know how long these technologies are going to take, but we could apply some time here. So what we don't have at the moment is how long does it take to research the individual technologies, we can simply add a new property within our data table, and to do that we have to modify our structure, which is this one, a new variable. We're just going to call that don't much like it, but research time. And it's just going to be an integer, non-editable. None of these should be editable in our case. And save that one, change it in the technologies. So we'll just have a research time of maybe 25 in every case. Have to look more closely at how that time is applied within the game, do some research, but for now we set 25. And our clock that we have, if we go into the animations, we can see that it has 13 frames. I think that's 13. Yeah, 13 frames. So we know that the very first frame, if we just stop it, the very first frame is full and the very last frame is almost full. And in actual fact, this is, the frames of these is actually backwards. We're actually counting up instead of counting down. So we could flip them all round, but since we can't use the animation, it seems a bit pointless. Oh, actually, can loop it, but we can't reverse it. I know we can play flipbooks backwards within the game itself, but again, it doesn't matter which order these are in. But we've got 13 frames where one is completely full. So we'd start here and we'd count down to here and then all the way down and then back to full again. That's how it works in the game. That basically means that there's probably 12 points within that clock that actually apply to our time. So how many full loops round is just simply going to be the time it takes to research it divided by 12. So if we go back to our research menu, we are setting the data to our yeah, it's on the event, isn't it? Setting the data to our tech icon, and we want to take our what did I call it? So that would be remaining time, and that will be researchers. Both of them need to be variables, and within our click and remaining time, not set, get. So the remaining time is the research time. So when we don't have any researchers, it should show infinity instead of actual people. We'll deal with that. But we're going to assume there's a researcher to start with, just to get the first bit done. So we'll divide it by 12. Is that what we want? No, we want what's left. No, we do want divide. We want to know how many times in total it has to go round. So we divide it by 12. And then we set the text on our text box to that value, and it will automatically convert it to an integer. we want. And we also want to just set the researchers to 0. They may be researching something else at the time, and we should reset the researchers, but that's obviously kind of a different thing anyway, which we'll have to get to. Let's see what that works as. In there, click that. So we now see 2 here. We said 25. 25 divided by 12 is 2 with a little bit left over. The clock face will need to represent that little bit left over. But we want the clock face to be able to be any one of the 12 icons. If we could use the flip book, we'd just simply be able to say set it to frame 3 or set it to frame 4, and those frames would represent how many seconds are left, and it would work really nicely. Unfortunately, we have to kind of do it manually. So we're going to create a function to do it, because we're going to need to do it regularly, and we're probably actually going to have to do it based on some local variable that we have within our research menu. But for now, we'll create a function to set timer icon. I'm going to call it image because it is an image, and the input is going to be time, and it's an integer, and that integer is going to be a range between 0 and 12. Let's just have a quick refresh on what that actually does within the game while we're going through. So maybe 12, maybe 13. So our timer is just a normal image. We could make it a sprite image so that we can just call set sprite on it. That might work, but for now we'll just go with the standard approach and see how we go. So we want to get the timer icon, and we know we can't set the sprite on it. It has to be set in the brush. So it's just set the brush. You can check over here. Yep, just set brush. And we know that we want to make a brush from sprite to do that. And it will be 16 by 16. And they're all our sprites that we can choose from. But now we need to pick the right sprite depending on how many we have. Let's just check over here. If we select something really simple, so it starts off fully filled at infinity, and it goes from, yeah, you never see it fully empty as it goes round, except perhaps when it finishes. Let's find out. No, not even when it finishes. Okay, so that's good. We don't ever see it fully empty, but we do see it fully full. Now we need to actually get the sprite. Now I did struggle with getting references to sprites here within this context. So what we don't have access to is all the sprites on the main, all these basically, and we can't drag them in. We can't create a component from an asset in a non-actor blueprint, so we can't reference any of these sprites from here, which is a problem. The question is, what can we create that can hold our sprites so that they can be accessible from within that blueprint? I know I can do it with a data table. I think I saw something at some point that allowed me to do this structure might work. See if we can define it in there. I thought there was some way we could create something that kind of had lots of sprites in it, some UI element. Yeah, that's not quite what I want, is it? Nope. Definitely don't want one of those. The slate brush allows us at least to define one sprite. Can we get access to that within the have a look in this one here? Nope. So we can't seem to reference it. Yep, okay, so nope, not an object library, not a slate brush. Can't use an animation. Let's just be sure of that. Research menu, designer, the clock. Oh, sorry, create new, isn't it? We're not selecting it. We can create a new sprite, but we can't seem to select our flipbook. We can set textures. Icon timer. I would have thought you would have been able to have a flipbook kind of animation for buttons and stuff like that, but there must be a different way of doing it. Okay, well, for now, the only way I can see of tying all these together in the way that we need is by using a data table, because I can define what I need in a data table. So we have a structure that we've called the timer, and it's just going to have a sprite I think all of the clock parts are poorly named. 20 onwards. So we'll start with completely empty. Although actually we did say we didn't need completely empty, so we'll start with completely full. Oh, that's the default, isn't it? We don't want to set default. Save that. Create a new data table using our timer structure. And completely empty. 1 point, 2 points, 3, 4, 5. Now we know we only need like 3 for the what we're actually going to go for. So 20. So we'll just do 4. We can come back and fill in the rest another time. So see if this is actually going to work. So within there, we want to get data table row, get data table row. So the time is how many seconds effectively we have remaining, and the row name is an integer. Well, it's still a name, but it's technically an integer. So we convert it to a string, and then we convert it to a name. And we get it from the timer frames. If we found one, we set the brush. A bit disorganized, but take all of those. So we set the timer image, we take the number that we've been given, we convert it into a row name. If we find that frame effectively, then we set the brush. So we want to call set timer image after we've done the divide. We want to do modular to get the remaining. Again, do it by 12. So we set the text underneath the timer, and we'll deal with the clearing of the researchers a bit later. So as I say, that's not really the ultimate solution there, because we need to know how many researchers there are. We need to put the people back into the pool of people. All that kind of stuff needs to happen when that gets cleared. So set time our image, this one, and that's the number. Let's see if that works. So if I click this, we have 2 and 1, and I think that's correct for what we set for the technology. Technologies. So what we'll do is we'll just change them. That will be 24, 25, and 27. And we can have that one as 12, so 122, just to make someone really different. Go in here, so now we can say that's 2 and nothing, so that's exactly 12, exactly 24, that's 2 and 1, and 2 and 3, and then this one is 10 and 2. So all of those bits line up. The clock's face is in the right place, the small number is the right value. Inevitably we're going to have to work on adding people. People will divide or kind of reduce the time. The updating the time should update the clock, etc. But yeah, so the big challenge of today was really trying to figure out how to get those kind of timer frames. I'm not keen on how I've had to go about it. Having a data table of the timer frames definitely seems a bit awkward. Now, I could just use a structure with 12 values, but how to pick the right value based on the name, based on the how many seconds are left, would be a bit awkward. I could have a structure with an array and define all the sprites within that array. That would probably be a little bit nicer. At least then we wouldn't have both a structure and a data table, and we wouldn't have to do the the integer to name conversion. But I can't think of another way where we can just define a set of sprites for us to use, so I'll probably have to do some research on that, see if there's a cleaner way to do what I'm trying to do here. But for this evening, I think we've covered kind of the core requirements of what we wanted to do. We have the primary set of research selection in place. I think as per the original, I've lost again. Once you've selected a research, you can't unselect it. There's not really any point because you can just select a different research anyway. So we don't have to worry about that. We do have to worry about remembering that research, which it doesn't. So it's really going to be up to the player controller or the game system as a whole to know that research is happening. At the moment we've tied the clicking of an available research down here directly to the displaying of that research. But likeliness is it's going to have to go from clicking on the available research to the player controller to say this is what the player wants to research, and then the player controller can say the player is going to start researching this and then we can display what we want to display. And the reason for that is that the player controller needs to know what's being researched, or something needs to know, particularly since we can leave the research as we do in the real game, and we're still actually able to adjust the researchers from the root menu. So we can't rely on the research widget really controlling the research. We can only rely on it to represent the research. So that's something to look at moving forward. But I think we kind of have to gonna get the people involved. This number basically, got to get that number in so that we can actually assign the amount of researchers or designers, as they call it, from the player. So that might be what we look at next stream. So I believe I will be available tomorrow, so I'll probably do another stream. It'll be again a Saturday, so it'll be earlier, probably kind of mid-afternoon time. But yeah, so that's all for this evening. Thanks for watching, and hope you join me again soon. Good night for now.